Well, thank you for having me. This is quite surreal for me. There's nothing really special about me, except maybe my mom and dad might think I'm pretty special, and my wife and daughters. I'm treated like a rock star when I get home from work every night by my daughters, who are 3 and 5. But God saw fit for me to be a part of something, and he put something in my hands a long time ago that I'm going to talk to you about today. So this is my journey to the heart of hell. These are my grandparents. My mom is here, my mom and dad. Clifford and Eleanor Lemke from Wisconsin. Hardworking man. He's from a family of German immigrants who settled up in Wisconsin, where it looked a lot like the land they had come from. There was a lot of trees and woods, and they naturally became loggers and hardworking families. My great-grandfather, Clifford's dad, Fred, that didn't appeal to him, because that meant there was only work in the winter when the ground was hard and you could take big trucks across the logging country, and that meant that there were many months there where you had no work, and that did not sit well with him, and so he became a carpenter. And while other men were sitting it out, drinking and getting drunk, and these great tales of being in bar fights and this and that, and being loathed by their wives and their children, Grandpa Fred was a man of integrity and honor, and took care of his family, and a man who the people around him would come to when they had problems, his nieces and nephews, because their own fathers were drunk all the time and not being productive. That integrity spilled over into his son, Clifford, my grandfather, who was also a carpenter and worked with his hands, and was a tremendous provider his entire life. I remember as a kid, when I would visit them at their home, I would wake up at the crack of dawn and he was already gone. Like, I never got to say good morning to Grandpa. I never got to say that, because when the sun came up, he was long gone, off to work. The journey started in the death of my grandmother there, Eleanor. In 1998, she died of cancer. And a year later, my grandfather went to visit her grave, and my Aunt Ellen said that he had a very hard time. And they were fearful that he would take his life, because he'd been talking very dark. And they actually took his gun away from him, his handgun. And he was very upset. How dare they take away my handgun? It better be back underneath my pillow in 10 minutes. And they did. They put it back. On August 11th, 1999, he woke up in the morning early as usual. He went to the kitchen table. He took off his wedding band, put it in a Ziploc bag, took his wallet out, took his ID out, put his ID on top of his wallet, stuck it in the Ziploc bag. He put a little note beside the Ziploc. He walked over to the phone, dialed 911. And when the operator came on, "This is 911, what's your emergency?" They just heard a pop. And the police arrived on the scene and found his lifeless body beside the phone there in the entryway. 2 years later, 2001, my dad called me and says, "I want you to come over. Mom's having a hard time. And she's thinking about Dad." So I went over. I was massaging my mom's shoulder, and she turned around and she said to me, "Dennis, I want you to find out what happened to Daddy during the war." It really struck me. It caught me off guard. I never expected to hear anything like that. So, of course, I said, "Yes, I'll do it." But where do I start? It's like, goodness gracious. I remember seeing pictures of him in his uniform. I knew he was in the Navy, but was he in the Atlantic? Was he in the Pacific? Was he stateside? Did he see any action? I had no idea. So I remembered that when I was younger, I had Grandpa autograph a World War II book that I had. It was called War in the Pacific. It was put out by the Associated Press. And I went to the book and I found his signature, and he put Seaman First Class Cliff Lemke, LCI 449, 43 to 45. My mom says, "You know what, Dennis? I think Grandpa circled some islands where he had been in the Pacific." And there was a map in the book. So I opened it, and sure enough, I found the map. He circled the Marianas, Saipan, Guam, Tinian, and then he circled Iwo Jima. One thing led to another. I got a hold of the LCI Association, and I got a list of men that were on the ship. Started contacting them, but this is 60 years later. They moved on with their lives. But the fellows started sending me a list, and I got a list of the crew. In particular, though, I didn't really understand what I was dealing with. I thought an LCI meant like you see on Saving Private Ryan, where the ramp drops down and the troops all run out. I thought that's what an LCI was. And so I was picturing, well, maybe he was delivering troops on these invasions. And I was downtown San Antonio one day walking around the Riverwalk, and I remember I was walking towards the Alamo grounds, and this fellow walked by me. He had a hat on. It said LCI Association. And I was like, wow. And I walked up and I was, hey, sir, my grandpa was on an LCI. He says, oh, yeah, which one? I said, 449. He says, oh, that's great. I was on the 760. Oh, okay. 760. I was like, goodness gracious, how many were there? Like, this is going to be impossible to find anybody that knew my grandfather. And so then I walked further down towards the Alamo, and I saw another fellow walk by. Hey, sir, I was on the 1080. I was like, 1080? Oh, my goodness. This is never going to happen. And I walked down by the Riverwalk, and two men, Bill Brinkley and David Cox, stood up from their table and started to walk away. And I walked up, and I says, my grandpa was on an LCI. And they said, which one? I said, the 449. Their eyes got as big as saucers. And they said, was he at Iwo Jima? I go, yes, sir. He circled on the map. He circled Iwo Jima. And then their next statement set the tone for what would be the next 14 years. They said, did he survive? Yes, he did. Why? They says that ship was on a recon mission at Iwo Jima. They had 60% casualties of the 70 men, and the captain of that gunboat got the Medal of Honor, Iwo Jima's first Medal of Honor. I was like, goodness gracious. They says, you need to dig into this more. When we get home from this, what happened was there was actually an LCI Association reunion in San Antonio, and I stumbled on these guys. Well, stumbled, I know I was supposed to be there. And so true to their word, a week later I got a complete roster of the men from the mission at Iwo Jima. So I had 70 names, and now I know I've got to find 70 guys. Well, you're here today at the archives, so I assume that you are probably like me, somebody who has a little voice in the back of your head that's telling you when you have a birthday card that most people would probably throw away. You're like, this is probably going to have significance 30 years from now. Right? So you keep birthday cards. I mean, who does that? So, when you have a list of 70 names, okay, now I've got something to work on. All right. Well, now you know that when I tell you that to date I've found 65, as archivists and researchers and genealogists, you know the work that goes into that. And all of the dead ends and all of the time on the internet and the phone calls. And then before, I remember when I first started, we didn't have the internet yet because it was in the infancy. And I would, you remember the old sound that you're waiting. Well, we didn't know any better back then, And you're waiting around for it to load the pages, and there wasn't much on the internet, and I was trying to find guys, and so I says, well, I'll use the operator. So I would dial 1411, and I need a number for Charles Hightower in Russellville, Arkansas. Okay, here's two numbers for you. Well, each one was 50 cents. So those are adding up, and my parents were irate. There are these phone bills, and I was like, well, here's some money, I was working this and that. And but what happened was I would find Charles Hightower, and Charles Hightower will say, you got to talk to John Overchuck. He was there also. He lives in Cleveland. And then John Overchuck would tell me about Leo Bedell, and then Leo Bedell would tell me. So it starts, how it goes. It starts to steamroll. And that long road of research took me all over the place. It took me to Belleville, Illinois, where I got to visit with William Snodgrass and his wife, Audrey. You can see that this was a long time ago. I've got I don't have that hollow look in my eyes, and I don't have dark circles yet. Leo Bedell and his wife. Leo Bedell is a special person to me. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. You'll have to read the book to find out why, but I wouldn't be here. My mom would not be here if it was not for Leo Bedell. There is a man who is alive right now, William Hildebrand, in Louisville, Kentucky. Leo passed away last year. And he would call him and send him a card every holiday, and thanking him for another year of life. He was a crew member on the gunboat with him. He was an officer. Charles Hightower from Russellville, Arkansas. What are the importance of the archives in researching? The folks that do it are vital to society, because without the researchers, without the archivists, without the genealogists, history is doomed to repeat itself. We're never going to learn. Although we still seem to make the same mistakes. The fact is, though, is that if it wasn't for the archaeologists and the archivists and the researchers and the genealogists, we would know nothing of our past. We would know nothing of our failures. We would know nothing of our achievements. We would know nothing of those who'd gone before. It's also the case in family lineage. We do the genealogy work for our families and build our family trees because we were really interested to know what makes me, me. And that's me on the right there. A bunch of information we're turning over to the National Museum of the Pacific War. Does this thing have a laser on it? Yeah, it does. Okay. The reason I tell you about the importance of the archives and research and whatnot is that I'm kind of taking a little bit of a side trail here from the story I was telling you, but the importance of every scrap of paper. This is from the prayer book that was in the pocket of Lawrence Bozarth. Now, what he would do is he would put on there, you see here, the dates. And we know this is July 1944. Now, July 1944 is the invasion of Guam on the 21st of July. So what he would do is he would put little notations that were meant to remind him that when he got back home from the war, it would remind him that he could tell family things that he had experienced during the war. Like we see here, 455 alongside, okay? Now that means that LCI gunboat 455 was alongside them that day. Here they had a swimming party. We see here they're at Tinian. Here he says, I've decided to get out of the galley. Somebody ticked him off and he was tired of him being in the galley, which in the book you find out that he actually eventually goes back and becomes a tremendous baker. He got mail. They're painting the ramps on the ship. They're painting the fantail. They're aboard the Rocky Mount for a church service. They fired, it says fired on right here, the 18th. Well, when you look at this is why every scrap of paper is important. If you take this paper, to most people this probably doesn't mean anything, but to the researcher or the genealogist who's actually digging in, you can take this document here and put it next to the ship's log, and then you'll know that when he says they fired on, you'll know that they're actually at Guam at this moment. The invasion isn't for several days, but they're at Guam covering underwater demolition team recon. UDTs went in and blew up hundreds of Japanese obstacles that had been placed on the reefs that were intended to kill and to slow down Marines landing on the beaches. Well, those things were taken out because the gunboats were there protecting the frogmen who were able to do their job. So when we say fired on, we know what was going on. We see here he says that he is Yes, they went back on the 21st. They went back to the Saipan area. Here he's canoeing. He's at Tinian, the Tinian invasion. His mother's birthday. In church alongside the 457. A piece of paper that to most people wouldn't mean much. To the archivist, you're able to tell a story. What can you get from a letter like this? This is to Signalman Carl Park from his mom. You see the date, January 23rd, 1945. As a researcher, you know that he has about 3 weeks until he's going to die at Iwo Jima. And his mom puts this letter together to her signalman son and sends it out. On January 23rd at 3 p.m. 1945 is when it gets stamped at Elkhart, Indiana. Just a simple little envelope tells a story. My favorite, and one thing that I was really successful at, was getting letters. The guys that were killed, 22 guys died at Iwo Jima on the gunboat my grandpa was on. One of the things that we were really successful at were getting letters. See, the fellows that died, their families looked at these letters as a testament that they had lived, and they did not get rid of them. They kept them. So when we would talk to families of William Corkins and Byron, Lawrence Bozarth, and some of these other fellows, when we would talk to them and say, hey, we're trying to find out about my grandfather and his service. Do you have anything? They would say, well, I've got letters. They're just letters. But you're able to take these letters, and they have a date. The letters establish a voice. They give a voice to this person. You can kind of see the way they talk, the way they interact, their sense of humor, what they cared about, what they hid from their parents. Because you know that when Byron Yarbrough is writing Betty Jones, and he's writing her and saying that everything's fine here in the Pacific, and you see that the letter is stamped September 23rd, 1944. Everything fine here in the Pacific, hope all is well back home. You can take the decalogue of the ship, go to September 23rd, and you see all day they were under aerial attack. That tells a story right there. He was trying to keep that from his loved ones. He was trying to spare them that worry and that concern and that fear that they would have. Dorothy Wallace. She was a CBS reporter and worked for Life magazine. She was a publicist. She is, I guess you could say, the love interest of the captain of the ship. They met in New York. Her family had these scrapbooks. They had seen him their whole lives, heard him talked about all their whole lives, and as we do as humans, we get bored with stuff over time, and they collect dust and whatnot. To their family, they're scrapbooks, right? They don't mean anything. But to us, when I heard about scrapbooks, I was like, oh, I got to get my hands on those scrapbooks. Well, come to find out, her mom, who was a reporter, and what do reporters like to do? They like to write. I was like, man, I got to get my hands on this stuff. So she wrote these great articles, and they were detailing the leave and their time together and things like that. Her mom had died a long time ago, and I had no option to interview her, but I got her voice. I got her voice here. Rufus G. Herring, the captain, later captain of the ship and the one that receives the Medal of Honor. We approached the family. Letters. Do you have any letters? We threw those out a couple years ago. I was like, you gotta be freaking kidding me, right? No, well, we did keep one suitcase. Well, we didn't do it on purpose. We were throwing out stuff. And then finally somebody looked in a suitcase and saw it was full of letters. We kept that one, but who knows what else we threw away. So we had like 43 to early 44. So we know that 45 and 40, the latter part of 44, are in some landfill, which was a heartbreaker. Does that look familiar, Nancy? Nancy Dupree is cleaning out the attic one day at her parents' home, and she finds a chest. And in the bottom, underneath the sweaters, is this stack of envelopes, wrapped just like that. And she had no idea who this was right here. Two years earlier, when she found these, 2 years before that, I was on the Alabama State Archive website. You keep track of that, right, sir? Used to, anyway. And I put a message on there, looking for any information about a Lieutenant Byron Yarbrough from Auburn, Alabama. He served with my grandfather in the Pacific aboard LCI gunboat 449. How am I doing on time? Okay. And anybody know anything? Send. All right? And then forgot about it. I mean, what are the chances? But you got to take that chance, right? You got to do it. So did it, send, and promptly forgot about it. 2 years later, Nancy Dupree is in the attic of her parents' old home, going through stuff. She pulls up sweaters. She's getting down to the bottom. This is going out. This is going into the trash. This is going to be here. This is, we're going to keep this. What is this? And she pulls up this stack. And her question is, who is this Byron Yarbrough? So she goes to the internet. Byron Yarbrough. Enter. Alabama State Archives. Right? Message board comes up. That's where I work. Right? That's what it says. The first thing that came up was that message that I had posted 2 years before. So we were able to get in touch with each other. And I was able to tell her who Byron Yarbrough was. She was able to contact the family of Byron. And we established contact that way. And we found out that this amazing story of Byron Yarbrough, who was in the Pacific. He is lonely. One of his jobs on the ship is he's the executive officer. One of the jobs on the ship is censoring the mail. He has no girlfriend. He's not married. He's never been married. One of the jobs is censoring mail. So he's reading all these guys are talking about their loved ones back home and this wonderful, I love you and I miss you and this and that and I think of you all the time. And you know how they wrote back in those days? It was beautiful, these beautiful compositions. And he's a bit of a romantic, so he's lonely. Well, back home, at college, his sister Jane is roommates and buddies with, is it Mary Ballinger? Mary Ballinger, who is a cousin of Betty Jones. They're talking about him. She talks about her brother. Man, my brother, I feel so bad for him. He's alone. His letters are so lonely. Here, check this out. And she's reading. She's like, oh my gosh, we got to do something about this. So they're like, she's like, I've got a cousin who is back home in Cordele, and she's like the same age as him. She's got, here's Betty Jones. She's back home minding the family store, minding the pharmacy, the Ed Jones pharmacy. She's 24. All the eligible men are where? In uniform, right? They're gone. They're serving, or they're 17 and too young, or they're too old for her. She is lonely. She wants to go and she wants to join up and become a nurse in the military, but her mom says, no, your place is here at the home and you've got to stay here and help Dad run the store and this and that. So she's there, seemingly in prison in Cordele, Georgia. Until one day when Mary says, hey, there's this lieutenant out in the Pacific. You want to write him? So she's like, what's it going to hurt? So she starts writing Byron Yarbrough. It was over 70 letters in total that were found. I'm not really sure if I should tell the rest of the story. I don't want to. Yeah, I'll tell it. I work in an emergency room. I have for 17 years, trauma. I've seen people die in every way possible you can imagine, of all ages, and of all means, from just a heart attack to abuse to somebody who owed large amounts of drug money and was tortured for 3 days before killed, to it's everything, drunk drivers and everything that involves with that, with killing families. And I will tell you that over time, seeing death starts to wear on you. All right? It doesn't happen really fast. It happens slowly over time. And after 17 years, your heart takes a little, it's like a ball peen hammer with a little chisel, and it just takes a little guard off of your heart every time something like that, you witness it. You're a witness to that. So you can imagine Byron Yarbrough is out in the Pacific, and he's been through the Marshall's campaign. He's already been through Saipan, where the Japanese civilians were jumping off the cliffs and killing their children and throwing their babies off because they were afraid they were going to be mutilated and massacred by the Marines. And he's seen all of this death, and he's lonely, and his heart is getting hard, and this isn't who he is. And all of a sudden, he gets this letter in the mail from this ray of sunshine, Betty Jones, and he just latches on to that hope. And they write each other. And at first, the letters are what you would expect. What kind of food do you like? Just like if you were dating, in your first date, which is usually extremely painful, and you're talking about what you like, and you like this movie, I like this kind of music, I like this kind of food, I can't stand this actor, blah, 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 blah. And you're going back and forth. But you don't want to ever have any conversation about something that can possibly drive that person away. So you never talk about politics, and you never talk about religion. You just talk about these little neutral subjects. And that is the way Byron's letters are in the very first. And they're feeling each other out and they don't think anything's going to happen. They're just happy to be writing each other. But what happens is they start falling in love. And as the letters, and as he approaches Iwo Jima, as the dates are getting closer to Iwo Jima, he's starting to see his mortality. And he's getting scared, because he's wondering, how long is my luck going to hold out? He's been through 5 invasions already. And he has that feeling that he's never had before, which is love for somebody. And he even knows it's unusual because he's never even met her. Just exchanged photographs. But he loves her. And she reciprocates. And they do it in a really cute way where she says, can you call me, can I call you my girl? And sure, I don't mind if I can call you my Byron. And they're back and forth, this beautiful romance. And at Iwo Jima, they take 3 hits. The first hit on the bow, second hit on the gun deck, and the third hit is a mortar round which lands right beside Byron. And he is killed. Just before they left Saipan, Byron sent a letter to his folks, introducing them to Betty. And he says, I want to tell you about this wonderful woman I've met. He sends them a letter and it says, would you please send her a gift from me? So they do. We know because Betty sends a letter back to him on the 25th of February saying, Byron, these pearls are beautiful. Oh my gosh, and I cannot believe, and I know they came from you because the postmark is from Auburn. She writes that letter, and he's already been dead for 6 days. She writes him every single day for 3 weeks, and he's already been dead 3 weeks. And these letters are just full of hope and the future. I cannot wait to meet you, Byron. Please let me know beforehand. Please don't surprise me because I have a dress that I want to get, and I want to meet you at the train station. It's going to be perfect. She says, I am just so lucky to have finally met somebody that I want to spend the rest of my life with. You have to promise me that you are not going to surprise me. These beautiful letters that she's writing. And she's getting concerned because some of them are coming back, return to sender. But she's thinking, he told her beforehand, there's going to be a long, quiet period because I'm going to be on a mission probably. So don't get alarmed. Her instincts are telling her I should be alarmed. then she's like, her mind is saying, yeah, but he warned you. This is until March 10th. He's been dead almost a month. And that's her final letter. That's when she gets the word. And that is Nancy Dupree's aunt. You know, Betty never married. She lived her whole life. She died in 1990s. She never married. She died. She had a problem with alcohol. All of that from a broken heart. And just think, that story would never have been found. No one would ever know that story. But letters were found. Not only found, but shared. I want to encourage you guys, especially you those that work here at the archives. What you do is so important. Maybe it gets to jobs get to where they get to be a job, right? You're clicking the time and in, time and out. Man, I cannot wait. I want to go see that movie tonight But what you do matter. You have no idea. One thing that I learned on this journey was that archives are not complete. Okay? No matter how many times you've gone over them, and I've went to archives all over the United States on this journey, and I've met some very, very offended. And I was like, are you sure that you've checked there? Oh, our archives are complete. And I'd say, would you mind if I looked anyway? Just, fine. I'd stomp out. I'd go back there. And I found Leroy Young's obituary, which they said didn't exist. Why is that important for a genealogist? Because the obituary is going to tell you who his surviving relatives were, right? So now I'm able to find his brothers and sisters, which I was able to. And that led to a fiance I didn't even know existed that he had, who had letters, who's still living. Evelyn Moon, what a beautiful name. And he died at Iwo Jima. All of that would not have been known. But archives are not complete. When someone comes to you and says, I'm on this journey and I'm trying to find, offer a smile. If you don't have the answer, steer them to somebody that does. Because there may be a Dennis Blocker who is there on the verge of a story that is going to become a national book on the New York Post must-read list, the New York Journal of Books must-read list. You don't know what is on the verge of happening just from a simple message on the Alabama State Archive website looking for information about Byron Yarbrough. Now, I don't know who the original person was that put that message board together. Was that you? No, sir. But what a service. That's it for me. They told me to stop at 12:40. It's 12:40.
We have just a few minutes for questions, but if you'll raise your hand, Amy or I will pass you a microphone. Because we are recording this, so we want to get your question.
If you do have a question and you've been thinking about something when I was talking, please don't be afraid, but please do ask. Ma'am? I live in San Antonio, Texas. My dad, who's there in a blue shirt, he was Air Force and military, and we were all over the world. We actually lived on Guam in the 70s, and I have pictures, great pictures of me playing in the sand, building sandcastles and sand in my mouth. My mom's shoveling it out of my mouth. But what's interesting is that's the very same beach my grandpa fought for. Like when he had guns barrel bore down on that beach, he never would have dreamed he'd have a grandson playing in the sand on that same beach.
30 years later.
30 years later. Yes, sir.
Let me give you this first.
How many military
records did you dig out, and where did you find them all?
The military records, the question was how many military records did I dig out and where did I find them? The majority of the records came from two sources. One, the actual veterans. A lot of the fellas over 60 years had sent off to the National Archives for records and had them back, and so they would share with me. But you have to bite the bullet, and you got to save money, and you got to mow yards, and you got to work overtime, and you got to do what you got to do to save money to get to the archives yourself. And I had that experience on 3 different occasions, actually getting to hold the gunboat, the actual deck log in my hands, and you can see this coffee spills and where they tried to wash it off. And I got to find where my grandfather came aboard on May 4th, 1944 in Pearl Harbor. It was very special to me to smell that and to hold that in my hands. It was very special. But the men and the National Archives. And the reason that you go is because they charge you, like, you're going to spend just as much on seriously, you're going to spend just as much on printing for the documents that you want, and then it may not be everything you wanted, so you might as well just go and get exactly what you want. Yes, ma'am.
You started out telling us how you started this journey from your mother's question. What did your family find answers to that question, and what has it meant to your family, the research that you've done?
That's a good question, and I think the best way to answer that is what happened on the 23rd of April in the Tower of America, overlooks San Antonio, 600-something foot tall Tower of America is a restaurant that revolves. So in the course of a dinner, you will have circled San Antonio twice, right? So we were up there under the guise of celebrating my sister Marnie being cancer-free from breast cancer. And so my mom was there, and she put up a fight about it's going to be so expensive. And I was like, just get up there. And then so she comes, and I got up and I did a toast to my sister being cancer-free. And then I says, now, Mom, I says, just think right now all across the United States on FedEx trucks, UPS trucks, mail carriers, aircraft, the book, The Heart of Hell, is crisscrossing the United States right now, headed to people's homes, to bookstores. And I says, all because you asked me to find out what happened to Grandpa. And I says, and everybody's going to get it on the 1st of March. I says, but not you. And she was like, what? And I reached down and I says, I made an arrangement with the publishers. And I says, they sent me the first one. And I held up the book. And I says, remember you asked me all those years ago, 15 years ago, and think about that, 15 years ago, you asked me, find out what happened to Grandpa during the war. And then I just reached across the table and I says, here's your answers. And they're there.
I'd like to do something. I want to introduce my wife.
This is the one I asked the question.
Dennis, I would like to give a plug to the book. For those of y'all who don't know, I'm Nancy Dupree, and those were my aunt's letters. And I've donated them to the archives so that they can be taken care of for other researchers that will come behind us. But the book is an amazing book. It is, and be prepared, have a box of Kleenex with you when you read it. I would encourage you all to read it. It's not just a war story. It is told from the perspective of the crew members and also their family members from both sides. And it really paints an amazing picture of what they were going through on that ship. And it's pretty, what's the word we would use? Graphic. Very graphic. But that graphic description answers Debbie's questions as to why her dad went through what he did. And I would encourage you all to read it. It's a wonderful book, very well written and incredibly well researched because of Dennis.
To get the book done, I wrote a manuscript myself, and it was a couple hundred pages, the manuscript that I wrote about the story that I had uncovered, because I knew it needed to be a book. The story was just too amazing, and once you read it, you're going to understand, like, I'm not just plugging a book because, like, this story is so important that my name isn't even on the cover of the book. I made a deal with Mitch Weiss, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and asked him if he would please get this book out there. And that was probably one of the toughest decisions of my life, because after all the 15 years of work that I did, it would have been nice to have a little bit of a, hey, Dennis Blocker involved. But Weiss did it, and it's beautiful. I mean, in the way it's written. Yes, sir.
Dennis, when does the movie come out?
Yeah, it's not. We'll see. We'll see. Yes, ma'am.
Have you had an opportunity to meet with Tom Brokaw or present him with your book?
No, ma'am, not yet. You know, the thing with this, a book like this, and what I found, and Mitch warned me, kind of like prepared me for, when you release a movie, the best it's going to get as far as reception is the first night, right? And then if it's a hit, it'll continue, but eventually it's going to drop off. That's how movies are. And then eventually they go to DVD. Books are a slow burn. And that's something that I had to, I was freaking out in the beginning. Books are a slow burn. So you release it, then the word starts getting out slowly on social media, and people tell people, and then it gets more and more people start telling each other. And so, to answer your question, I'm thinking that once it starts to get more word out there, then the movie might be a possibility. If there was ever a book begging to be made into a movie, this, and I'm telling you, exactly, just that story alone. I mean, especially the setting, Auburn, Georgia, Alabama, are you kidding me? And the Notebook, God's sake.
We were just talking about that.
By the way, I got to meet Ryan Philippe. And also the guy who plays in that, what's his name, the main actor? Ryan Gosling? Yeah, Ryan Gosling. I was down at Mobile for helping out with the hurricane relief, and I went to a food truck, and I looked in the back, and I was like, you look familiar. And hey, you that dude on the Notebook? And he goes, yeah. I was like, well, that was all right.
One thing that's really unusual when you start talking about World War II stories is you don't typically get the perspective of the fiancés and the perspective of the women that are at home and the perspective of the families that are left at home. What do you think finding letters like this set of letters that Nancy found adds to this story?
Mitch always told me about tension. And see, we worked together in the manuscript. And the Japanese chapters, I wrote the Japanese chapters. And when we were doing the manuscript, he would always tell me, we need more tension, we need more tension. And he's driving me crazy with the tension stuff. And I didn't understand it until one of the reviewers, Marty Catterley from the museum in Fredericksburg, National Museum of Pacific War, she was talking to me, and she was like, man, she's like, the tension was so much in that book. I had to flip to the back to see who was going to die. I couldn't stand it. Right? And then I got it. Because she got it, right? But Mitch also knew that you can't just have a book of tension. You have to come back, right? Of the 70 men on that gunboat, we were able to get the perspective of Mary Cooper, Betty Jones, Dorothy Wallace, and their perspective is from all these letters. Now, I was able to actually interview Mary Cooper, and I will tell you that when I interviewed her last year, see, I had tried to talk to Mary for 10 years, and she wouldn't tell me anything. See, because Fred Cooper, her husband, dies on the mission, right? So she remarried. And she respected her husband that she wouldn't talk about her previous life. It was very old school. It kind of frustrated me. But I respected her. Well, her husband passed away. I had nothing to do with it. Her husband passed away. And Rebecca, her daughter, calls me up one day and says, Mom wants to talk. Mitch and I talked to her together on a conference call. That is the only interview of the 300 that I did that I cried. Because when she was talking to us, I've heard of this, but I know that women have different compartments in their heart. And she had kept that compartment locked and sealed for 70 years because she didn't want Rebecca to have any of that sadness growing up. So she never acknowledged that part of her heart. She never went there. And it didn't dissipate. It was under lock and key, and it was vibrating in there, but she never let that out. When her husband died, when we talked, I can tell you this. The crying that she did on that phone, on that interview, I felt guilty for talking to her. I felt guilty. She was moaning and crying, and I apologize. I'm so sorry. She's like, no, you don't understand. This is so good. I've had this in for 70 years. It was like it was yesterday that happened to her. Like yesterday. So I think that's a perspective on World War II that, like you said, is not out there. And that's one thing I'm very proud of. Another thing that I'm proud of, on this ship, how are we doing on time? Are we okay?
You're good.
Okay. Another thing that I'm proud of, on a ship of 70 men, there was one African-American sailor. His name is Raphael L. Johnson. He's from Decatur, Texas. Now, if there was ever a sailor who would have had hell on earth, can you imagine being Raphael L. Johnson in a 1943, 1944 gunboat in the Pacific where you're the only African-American on a ship with 69 white guys? Your commanding officer, by the way, is from North Carolina. The executive officer is from Alabama. Now, how do you think life is going to be for Raphael L. Johnson? But you know what? It wasn't like that. And that was the biggest shocker on this journey. You see, Herring and Yarbrough, they set the tone. Everything rises and falls on leadership, right? They set the tone on how things were going to be on the ship. And Raphael Johnson was promoted. He was made a gunner. Now, excuse me, you're on a small gunboat. If you're a gunner, you have the life of the crew in your hands. Are you going to put the life of the crew of 79 people in the hands of somebody you don't trust on a gun? No, why? Because that person knows, the captain knows, Raphael Johnson is the man that I want to protect us when a Japanese fighter aircraft is coming down, swooping down on us. I want Raphael Johnson there. Because he is a man who can shoot a gun. Now, those other guys could shoot a gun too. But what was it about Raphael Johnson that these officers from the South would promote him above everybody else? It was something special going on that ship. And I think of all the fellas, and I was talking to my mom and dad about this last week. I think of all the fellas, I'm more, and my grandfather, I'm really excited about folks who learn about Raphael Johnson. Because when he got wounded at Iwo Jima, and his face was shot off and his arm blown up. See, he had been a baseball player for the Decatur Cats in Texas. Star. Amazing athlete. Now he comes home from the war. He has to wear long sleeves because he's vain and he's kind of afraid of how he looks to people and his face is disfigured. He didn't have the same life coming home. Everything was okay on the gunboat. He had brothers on the gunboat. He had a family on the gunboat. When he came back, it was back to old Decatur, Texas, and how things were. He didn't have the resources. I cannot tell you, there's no happy ending for Raphael Johnson in the book, at the epilogue. I cannot tell you Raphael Johnson went home and had a family and had kids and had grandchildren that he bounced on his knee. I can tell you about Raphael Johnson in the 4th of July and New Year's Eve getting in his truck and driving way off into the country so he wouldn't hear the fireworks because of the terror it would give him. I can tell you about Maurice Johnson, who I interviewed, and Bobby Johnson, his brothers, being bounced on his knee, and them getting off of RL, they call him RL, they getting off of his knee, and them looking back and seeing blood spots on his pants. because when bouncing on the knee, old shrapnel from Iwo Jima would surface up and pierce his skin and cause his legs to bleed. He died at 46 years old of cancer in a lonely hospital bed in Dallas VA hospital after languishing for days. And he's got a cold marker now in Plainview. I'm excited about people to know about Raphael Johnson.
We have time for one last question.
I'd like to, I've enjoyed this, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I would like to ask you a little bit about the letters and what kind of training you had to be a researcher. What was your academic training as far as research is concerned? And I have a follow-up.
Yes, sir. I had none. I didn't have any academic training. I didn't know how to start. I do now. I'm amazing at finding people, and now I actually teach people how to do that. But I didn't know, and it was just trial and error.
Well, research is not easy, as you know. The thing that worries me about primary resources like letters is that the internet age and the email age is doing away with that resource.
That's right.
I mean, I know lots of people that saved letters. I know lots of people that saved every letter they ever got from a son, every letter they ever got from a mother. But I don't know anybody that saves emails. And I'm wondering if we're going to lose the sources of information like his.
You're right.
And how that will affect the writing of history in the future. As you know, most of the bestsellers come from primary resources of actual handwritten letters, home to mom, and that kind of stuff. And that's all going to be missing when the letters go bye-bye and all we do is email each other. What are your opinions about that?
That's funny. Mark Wilson and I were talking about that last night, how that 500 years from now, archaeologists are going to unearth a phone and finally figure out how to power it up. And they're going to look, and it's going to have words like, see you later, and they're going to be like, are these guys idiots? Do they not know how to speak? Like, did we just did they just dumb down? Like, what happened to society? And I don't know what the answer to that is as far as like what we can do other than, and especially if you start thinking about sun flares and, power outages, like if there's no power, our history's gone. And that's exactly what you're saying. If there's no electricity, our history is gone from this point on, because we're not going to be able to pull up all the old emails. And what I do is I copy paste all of my emails, put it in a Word document, and then print them. So there's at least a record, but no one else is going to do that. I'm a weirdo. And it's just sad. I agree. I don't know what the answer is. What do you think?